Singularity Collapse by Clifford Angar. Read by Thomas Barker. The hull of the ancient generation ship groaned as Chas made his way down the darkened corridor. The aging metal creaked and popped under the immense pressure of the void. Chas shivered, the chill of deep space seeping through several layers of threadbare jackets. It had been 3 long, cold months since the life support system blinked off. Oxygen was the first to go, the reserves depleted within a day. Heat and water filtration lasted a little longer, but without oxygen, the end was inevitable. Over 2,000 people, the last remnants of humanity, all gone in less than a week. All except Chas and Roz. Roz blamed it on the elders. They were the ones who maintained life support, the intricate system of machines and filters that kept the remnants of civilization alive aboard the ship. Roz was convinced they had deliberately sabotaged the system as an act of rebellion, to finally be free of their maintenance duties after so many centuries adrift in space. Chas wasn't so sure. All he knew was that the ship was dead, and if he and Roz didn't figure out how to get life support running again, they would join the rest of the crew. As Chas entered the Elder's chamber, his breath caught in his throat. All 10 of the wizened old men and women were still sitting upright in their throne-like chairs, facing the central dais. Their withered hands gripped the armrests as if frozen in place. Their skin was pale but otherwise untouched by decay. It was as if they were merely sleeping, not grasping their last gasps over 3 months ago. Chas suppressed a shudder. He quickly crossed the room to access the central control panel. As one of the junior engineers, Chas had studied the ancient systems under the Elder's guidance. He prayed that had been enough to revive life support without them. After several minutes of fumbling with the unfamiliar interfaces, Chas slumped to the floor in despair. It was no use. The diagnostic screens were flashing red, displaying inscrutable error messages in the Elder's peculiar runic language. Chas's limited training was not enough to make sense of it. He glanced back at the silent council, sitting immortal in death, and anger suddenly boiled within him. He jumped to his feet and stormed over to the lifeless elders. "Why won't you help me?" he screamed into the face of the elder known as Nuva. "What did we ever do to deserve this? I know you can fix life support, you just don't want to." Nuva's glassy eyes stared straight ahead, unmoving. Chas pounded the armrests of Nuva's chair in rage and frustration. There was no response from the desiccated body. Exhausted, Chas collapsed to his knees. Tears streaked down his face as he sobbed in despair. After all they had sacrificed to survive, was this how the last humans would meet their end? Stranded alone in the cold darkness. He didn't notice the sound of Roz's footsteps until her hand gripped his shoulder. He looked up, eyes red and puffy. Roz's face was etched in sadness and determination. "It's no use," Chas said hoarsely. "Without the elders I can't fix it. This ship will be our tomb." Roz knelt down and embraced him. "Have faith," she whispered. "We'll find a way." Roz gently helped Chas to his feet. "Come on," she said. "Let's get out of this creepy mausoleum." As they exited the silent council chambers, Roz continued speaking in a calm, reassuring tone. "I know you did your best. The elders designed these systems to be run solely by them. They didn't trust anyone else with that knowledge." Chas shuffled along despondently. "Then what hope do we have? We're the last ones left." Roz gave his shoulder a supportive squeeze. "We have each other, and we're not giving up. There has to be a solution." Together they made their way through the cold, dark corridors, their way lit only by the dim glow of Roz's salvaged emergency lamp. As an apprentice botanist, she had some technical knowledge, but nothing like Chas's engineering training. However, she maintained a steadfast belief that between the two of them, they could crack the code of the life support systems. They had to. The alternative was certain death. Eventually they arrived at the site Roz had prepared, one of the storage bays that formerly housed the ship's library. With the systems down, they had taken to holing up in areas easier to heat using scrap metal and makeshift burners. Roz had also raided the library for every tech manual she could find before the cold shut everything down. She headed straight for the stack of musty old tomes she had arranged on one of the storage shelves. "These manuals are from centuries ago, back when the ship was first launched," she explained, flipping open a heavy book. "They have to contain some clues that can help us." Chaz sank down against the wall, exhausted. "You really think some 1,000-year-old manual is going to know more than the elders did?" Roz shot him a fierce look. "It's better than giving up. Are you going to help me or not?" Chaz held her gaze for a long moment, then hauled himself up with a weary sigh. They had already lost so much. Friends, family, their entire world. If there was even a chance this plan could work, he had to take it. Together they pored over the arcane pages, puzzling their way through ancient technical diagrams and convoluted descriptions. The hours stretched on as they focused their dwindling energy into deciphering any clues that could lead them to restarting the life support system. Finally, well past exhausted, Chaz stumbled onto an odd schematic. It depicted a bank of machinery nowhere near the main life support facility. Rubbing his grainy eyes, he checked the heading. "Auxiliary Life Support Control Unit, Deck 42, Section MV-18. "Roz, look at this," he croaked. "Why would there be a backup system all the way down on Deck 42? Roz scanned the page, frowning. The elders never mentioned an auxiliary unit, but if this is real... Hope flickered in her eyes. Chaz felt it stirring within himself as well. Deck 42 was a poorly maintained area, abandoned centuries ago when the population declined. Could it be that life support could be revived from there? Roz snapped the book shut and stood up decisively. "We're going down to Deck 42, now." Chaz mustered his last reserves of energy to follow her out the door. This sliver of hope gave him new strength. Together they would find a way, or die trying. Chaz collapsed with exhaustion as the violent shaking of the ship finally ceased. The emergency override had worked. The catastrophic systems failures were stabilized. Life support was restored. As the smoke cleared, Chaz became aware of the eerie silence around him. "Roz," he croaked, his throat raw. There was no response. Adrenaline coursing through his veins, Chaz hauled himself to his feet. "Roz!" he shouted desperately. His voice echoed through the ruined life support chamber. He could see clearly to the opposite wall, where they had made their leap across the shattered abyss only moments before. Roz was nowhere to be seen. Chaz's mind reeled in panic and confusion. She had been right beside him, hand clenched in his, as they made that final jump together. They had succeeded in activating the override switch. The ship was saved. So where was Roz? Chaz stumbled around the chamber, hyperventilating. "Roz, where are you?" He screamed over and over until his voice went hoarse, but all he heard in response was the emptiness of the ravaged ship. He fell to his knees amid the sparks and rubble, sobbing. After everything they had survived together, how could she be gone? It was impossible, unthinkable. Yet as the minutes stretched on, Chaz reluctantly accepted the unbearable truth. Roz had simply vanished. There was no sign of her, no trace left behind, no clues as to where she could have disappeared in the brief moments after they restored life support. Numb with shock, Chaz eventually pulled himself to his feet. He had to keep searching. She had to be somewhere on the ship. Stumbling through the debris, he made his way out of the crippled life support chamber and back into the cold, dark corridors. "Roz!" His cry echoed down the abandoned passageways. Over and over he shouted her name, refusing to give up hope that she would appear around the next corner, that her disappearance would prove to be some terrible mistake or dream. But only silence answered his calls. There was no trace of Roz anywhere on the ship. She was simply gone without explanation. Chaz was now utterly and completely alone, the last human left alive aboard a dying ghost ship drifting endlessly through the void.